You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. And it just gets curiouser and curiouser in Wonderland. We're still in February, but we do have the mad tweeter. And we're not even in March yet, but then we'll get the March hare, who's also mad. And we have had Tweedledum and Tweedledee, with one firing and one withdrawal of a nominee. And it all goes on. So we have a good program for you today. We have an in-depth interview with Farai Chideya, who I've been wanting to get on the program for such a long time. And we have, because we need to, an extended Surrealism Corner. But before we get to any of that, we have to go inside those headlines. Let's start abroad and then come home, if we can recognize home. India's rapidly worsening air pollution now rivals China's as the deadliest on the planet, with particulates killing about 1.1 million people prematurely each year. That's from a new study by the Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation with the Health Effects Institute. In eastern Afghanistan, an armed mob that included relatives of a young woman who'd eloped with her lover stormed the police station holding the couple, dragged the two young people out, beat them, and shot them to death. The woman, Fatiha, age 18, had been married against her will, so she'd eloped with her chosen love, a young man from a neighboring village, Hidayatullah, in his early 20s. They'd hoped to make it over the mountains. The police caught and arrested them on suspicion of adultery. Hawa Alam Nuristani, a member of the Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission, said, quote, "Such cases happen a lot, but don't come out in the media." No one has been charged or arrested for the murders. Veles, a Macedonian town of 55,000 people, was, we now know, the registered home of at least 100 pro-Trump websites during the 2016 campaign, most of them filled with brazenly fake news and all of them brimming with sensationalism. The websites were a goldmine for the young men, mostly teenagers, who created and ran the sites, earning them an average $16,000 every month or two. The average monthly salary in Macedonia is $371. Time to return to the land of the Statue of Liberty, where Trump's deportation purges have begun. Campaigning, Trump repeatedly swore that deportations would commence only with violent criminals who are in the U.S. illegally and not with the millions of undocumented, peaceable other people. So, naturally, they began with Guadalupe Garcia de Rios, a Phoenix, Arizona mother of two United States-born children who herself has lived north of the border since she was age 14. Guadalupe's violent crime was having impersonated another employee in order to get work at a mini golf park, and she'd been arrested by notorious Maricopa County Sheriff Joe Arpaio, long since fallen from grace and from office. She'd been detained for months, but then, after appealing deportation, for subsequent years she was allowed to remain in the country so long as she checked in with immigration every 6 months, which she did. Previous presidents allowed this. But this time, thanks to Trump's executive order, she was taken from her family and deported to Mexico. Okay, time to dive into the madness that is now our nation's capital. Trump's only in his 4th full week in office, but what some have predicted to be growing pains have already become standard procedure. The chaos and deliberately fostered competing factions that always defined Trump's mode of operating in the business world are now defining his administration. Let's start with the backtracking. One of his first actions was to announce a 90-day hiring freeze on all federal jobs. Backtrack. He's been forced to renege, with a lengthy list of exemptions, including all military personnel, that's 1/3 of total government employment alone, plus all jobs deemed necessary to meet national security or public safety responsibilities. Altogether, this virtually nullifies the initial action. Backtrack. The date for ending Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act keeps getting extended and is now quite some vague distance in the future, while Congress tries to figure out why replacing it ain't so easy. Trump had vowed to kill it on day one. Backtrack. He was going to destroy the anti-nuclear pact with Iran and get out of NATO, as he put it, in his first days in office. Backtrack. It turns out that the Mexican border wall would cost $21.6 billion, according to a Department of Homeland Security internal report that Reuters news service got hold of. It also would take more than 3 years to construct. Construction on the wall was going to begin within his first month, remember? Oops, seems Mexico sure is not going to pay for the wall, and neither is Congress eager to make taxpayers foot the bill. Now Trump is claiming that the wall will pay for itself. No explanation of what that means. Clever wall. Then, because news flies like snowflakes in a blizzard these days, which means the morning's outrage gets buried under the afternoons, let's not forget the category I call bit the dust. Bit the dust. Vincent Viola, Trump's businessman nominee to lead the Army, withdrew his name from consideration when strict Defense Department rules refused to permit him to transfer ownership of his businesses, including owning the National Hockey League's Florida Panthers, to family members as a form of fake divestiture. Question. How come DOD rules don't apply to White House people? Bit the dust. Senate Republicans, even senior Senate Republicans, besieged by public outrage, pressured Trump to pull the plug on Andrew Puzder, his nominee for Labor Secretary. Puzder's hearings were repeatedly postponed while Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell frantically tried to corral his own senators who were defecting because of piled-up Puzder scandals, having employed an undocumented immigrant, not paying taxes on her salary, having apprenticed himself to a mob lawyer early in his career, and having allegedly beaten his ex-wife, as she testified in court, then had to withdraw to gain custody of their children, and later discussed in detail while in disguise on Oprah's television program. Mind you, these men had not been deterred by a possible labor secretary who wants to abolish the minimum wage entirely, or by his other multiple political and business offenses. But the possibility of that tape going public, as indeed it has, terrified these guys. Cherchez les femmes these days. Score one for Oprah, and even more for the vast pressure from the street, marches and phone calls and emails to senators, which was formidable, because on Puzder's side stood big lobbying money and the mobilization of the National Restaurant Association, the International Franchise Association, the National Retail Foundation, and chain restaurant groups like CCR. And they still lost out to Oprah, a battered ex-wife, and fast food waitresses. And bit the dust with a huge thud, former general and briefly National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. An average National Security Advisor's tenure is 963 days. Flynn was forced to resign after 24 days. But the story's nowhere near over yet, although we've learned that the intelligence community discovered Flynn had been in daily communication with the Russian ambassador to the United States during the campaign and the transition, had been reassuring Russia regarding sanctions, and that he lied to Vice President Pence about having done so. We learned that former acting Attorney General Sally Yates, fired by Trump for having refused to enforce his travel ban, had earlier informed the White House about Flynn's conversations and about Justice Department grave concern that they made him vulnerable to Russian blackmail. Now it turns out that there were many in Trump's campaign who were in touch with Russian officials, specifically Russian intelligence agents. Oh, wow. So the refrain now is, as it was in Nixon's dwindling days, what did the president know, and when did he know it? Meanwhile, Trump and his inner circle claim that the Flynn fall from grace was because of a, quote, erosion of trust, not because Flynn did anything wrong. Oh, wait, just as I've been writing these notes, that's shifted to praising Flynn and blaming his fall on, who else, the media, and also blaming the intelligence community for finding out the truth, and accusing leakers, whose other name is whistleblowers, for letting the citizenry know about Flynn's possible, no hyperbole, treason. There seems to be a pattern here, one you might call getting away with it. After Yates warned them, the Trump inner circle sat on this information for days, not sharing it with the vice president and pushing for the White House counsel to let them know whether what Flynn did was strictly illegal or whether there was any weasel room. In other words, Trump was not concerned that his own national security advisor had violated national security by conducting business with an antagonistic foreign power well before the inauguration. Nor was Trump concerned with moral or even cosmetic fallout, only the legal minimum you could squirm out of. It's of a pattern with his comments on the infamous Access Hollywood tape about what women will let you get away with when you're famous. Quote, "I don't even wait, and when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything. Grab 'em by the pussy. You can do anything." Period. Close quote. Well, more about the Flynn resignation in the Surrealism Corner later in the program. Meanwhile, the Wall Street Journal just reported that the intelligence community is now withholding information from Trump because they fear it being leaked to foreign governments. This is interesting, since Trump is now accusing the intelligence community of leaking the Flynn revelations, when it appears far more likely that the leaks came from his own White House, where the Bannon versus Priebus versus Kushner versus Flynn factions and more jockey for power as if they were courtiers in a Borgia court. 3 psychiatrists started a trend that is now popping up in newspaper letters to the editor columns across the country. After the election, Dr. Judith Herman, professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, Dr. Nanette Gartrell, associate clinical professor of psychiatry at University of California and assistant professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, and Dr. D. Mosbacher, assistant clinical professor of the Department of Community Health Systems, University of California, sent a letter to then-President Obama, members of Congress, and United States military leaders. It read in part, quote, "We are writing to express our grave concern regarding the mental stability of President-elect Trump. Professional standards do not permit us to venture a diagnosis for a public figure we have not evaluated personally. Nevertheless, his widely reported symptoms of mental instability, including grandiosity, impulsivity, hypersensitivity to slights or criticism, and an apparent inability to distinguish between fantasy and reality, lead us to question his fitness. We strongly recommend that he receive a full medical and neuropsychiatric evaluation by an impartial team of investigators. If such an evaluation were to take place, we recommend that it specifically focus on antisocial and narcissistic personality disorders." Period. Close quote. More such concerned expert letters now surface every day, all in the wake of these 3 courageous women. A few last notes inside the headlines. First, overlooked during the campaign was Trump's crusade against legal as well as illegal immigration. Now, a reliable Trump toady, Senator Tom Coughlin, Republican of Arkansas, has written the first of what may be a series of bills to revamp the immigration system and dramatically reduce the number of people who can obtain green cards and other visas every year. The Trump Organization is engaging a licensing deal involving a luxury resort in the Dominican Republic, in direct violation of his pledge to halt all new international Trump-branded projects during his presidency. His son Eric Trump, who recently visited the island, with American taxpayers floating the $100,000 bill for Secret Service agents who had to accompany him on his private business trip. Well, Eric claimed that there had been vague talks about the branding deal well before the campaign, so this wasn't a new deal. Vague talks. Last, so much for the blue-collar billionaire who inveighed against Goldman Sachs and the banks for having, quote, robbed our working class, and so much for the suckered folks who fell for it. Shares in America's banks are booming, with Goldman Sachs Group, J.P. Morgan Chase and Company, and Bank of America hitting fresh trading milestones that seemed unreachable during the worst of the financial crisis. Investor expectations of lower taxes and lighter regulation under Trump have added $280 billion in combined market value to the nation's 6 largest banks since Election Day. It's unlikely that this is due to Hillary Rodham Clinton, who, when a private citizen, gave several speeches at Goldman Sachs urging equal pay and more hiring and promotion of women, and who was crucified for having done so. But it just possibly has something to do with the fact that Trump's puppet master and special advisor, Steve Bannon, plus Jay Clayton, who heads the Security and Exchange Commission now, plus new Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, plus Gary Cohn, new head of the Council of Economic Advisers, as well as quite a number of other minor actors in Trump's brain trust, are all Goldman Sachs alumni. Well, well, what do you know? It's time for a short break here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, but I'll be back directly with my guest this week, Farai Chideya, who has written a brilliant essay called The Call-to-Whiteness. Coming right up.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome back, and thanks for helping me welcome my guest, Farai Chideya. She is an American novelist, a well-known multimedia journalist, and a radio host. She produced and hosted Pop and Politics with Farai Chideya, a series of radio specials on politics for 15 years. She currently still produces and hosts One with Farai, a podcast for Public Radio International. Additionally, she's also a senior writer for 538 Politics. She's published a novel, Kiss the Sky, and she's also the author of 3 nonfiction books about race and politics, Don't Believe the Hype, The Color of Our Future, and Trust, Reaching the 100 Million Missing Voters. Prior to 2009, Chideya was the host of National Public Radio's program News and Notes, and before that she hosted Your Call, a daily radio call-in show on San Francisco's KALW Public Radio. She got her start in journalism working for Newsweek and MTV News and the Oxygen Network, and she's received numerous awards for her work, just a few samples, among them a special award from the Lesbian and Gay Journalists Association for AIDS reporting in 2008, an Enterprise Reporting Award from the National Association of Black Journalists for a piece on Skid Row in 2007, a North Star Award for covering communities of color in 2006, and a Distinguished Honoree Award from the Black Entertainment and Telecommunications Association. She is currently a fellow at the Shorenstein Center on Media, Politics, and Public Policy, based at Harvard's Kennedy School. It's my great pleasure to welcome Farai Chideya. Farai, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Robin. I'm just delighted.
I've admired your work for so long, and your writing, your politics, it's good stuff. And just after the election, you wrote an essay, which I'm going to nag you now. It has to become a book down the line. The Call-to-Whiteness. The Rise of the New White Nationalism and Inadequate Establishment Whiteness Response. It is so damn good. It is just, congratulations. Wow.
No, thank you. Thank you.
It feels to me like it's been coming and needed and necessary for so long.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So I wrote this essay sort of almost in a fugue, where the election had happened, and shortly afterwards I was reflecting on my time as a political reporter in this election and in past elections, and how people were constantly surprised that whiteness existed. People assume there is something called blackness, or there's Latino identity, or that there's a women's identity, but not looking at whiteness, and particularly white men, as as much of an ethnic demographic and as a political cohort had never been done. And I think one reason for it, so I essentially go through how white supremacy and white nationalism had seemingly come out of nowhere in this election to prominence, but that really what we had done is we had simply subsumed any discussion of it to this assumption that whites were non-racist, and that whites, not even non-racist, but that whites just didn't have a race.
That's right.
And so the appearance of white nationalists came as a surprise to people who assumed that race was only something that non-whites had.
Because white and male is the generic.
I mean, it's considered the default in American society.
That's right. It's human, and anything that's not that isn't quite human.
Right. And so what I did was talked about my many years of engaging, both studying and engaging with white supremacists and white nationalists, everything from meeting Klans people face to face after a blizzard in Frederick, Maryland, to engaging online with today's alt-right, because I'm not, I can't say that I'm not afraid, but I'm not afraid of doing the work to engage with people if I learn something and I can also be safe about it. And I do take precautions. But in talking to people, it became very clear after the election that, first of all, the biggest uncovered race relations story in America was the existence of whiteness as a political demographic, where people were willing to vote as a bloc. Because you have to remember that so much of the complaints about different groups of people of color in politics has been, they vote like a bloc. They're not analytical.
That's right.
They're not thinking for themselves.
That's right.
But in this election, we saw that white men, but also white women,
yes, we did,
voted for Donald Trump, and that all sorts of different racial appeals that seemed illogical on the surface had succeeded.
Yeah.
Irrational and also just not justified by any facts. But I've spent enough time in the field and years as a political reporter that I could see where these appeals were working. And my biggest problem really, even though this is not necessarily the main point of the piece, is to look at the failings of journalism, to examine this white supremacy and white nationalism as not just something that pops up now and then, but as an everyday part of political discourse that we simply don't examine because it doesn't fit what we think of as American.
Right.
It's kind of like, I would say that this version of politicized white supremacy is like carbon monoxide. I mean, it looks the same as oxygen. It's invisible, it's clear, but it's not harmless.
Yeah. And
it certainly has an impact on people. So the part of the subtitle, The Rise of the New White Nationalism and Inadequate Establishment Whiteness Response, really pertains to the idea of establishment whiteness as this construct which says whiteness doesn't really exist and it's not really a problem.
Yeah,
but in a time like this, it's a problem.
Yeah, you think? Those are the folks who talk about being colorblind when in fact they're not even color literate. So first of all, I don't think that this election was about economics. I think that there is an element there, but I think if you look below the surface, although there is in many cases an economic element, for me it was about race and sex. And it stunned me, the rapidity with which they immediately rushed in to say, well, the solution to this is to end identity politics, by which they never mean white people's identity with being white people. What's been the reaction that you've got?
Well, actually, the number one reaction, which I wouldn't say, I certainly wasn't seeking it, but in retrospect, it didn't surprise me, was that I actually got a certain degree of, I wouldn't call it respect, but acknowledgement from white nationalists who said, you understand us.
Yes.
Which I thought was interesting. I got a lot of followers on Twitter who were self-avowed white nationalists, and they would kind of play this game with me, like, well, I would follow them back. I would look at their Twitter bios, see they were a white nationalist, and follow them back, and they'd be like, well, I'm a white nationalist, as if that would scare me. I was like, that's why I followed you. And I got into some really interesting conversations with people who, by and large, were not sort of the internet troll variety, but they were almost people who were apologist for their identity. They were like, well, I'm a white nationalist, but you understand I have no choice. In a country where we're about to be overwhelmed by liberals and multiculturalists, this is the only option left for me. And I would just kind of patiently debate them because I actually want to know what they feel. And one of the things which I think I do mention in this piece that really popped out to me was when I would say, well, you know that the oldest capital city in America is Santa Fe, New Mexico, which was founded in 1610, meaning that of the contiguous United States as they exist today, not as they existed in the 1600s, the oldest, founding fathers and mothers were actually Latino and not white. And they'd be like, yeah, we know that, but that's kind of irrelevant because we're looking for white political power. Yeah. So there's this understanding that all of this rhetoric that America was always a white country isn't even true. Yeah. And still, and I make the comparison to the Boers of South Africa, who claimed not quite a birthright, but a right of ownership by force, and said, well, yeah, we are, and there's many, and of course there's many, Afrikaners who've done so much for South African democracy, and I'm not challenging that, but they're still
there. You go again, being generous.
No, but I have to because
I know.
Because the thing is, I want to be generous of spirit because I want to encourage generosity of spirit.
I know.
And I want to encourage, and I do think that some people today, even people who may have cheered at the rise of white nationalism, are kind of horrified by the form that it's taking. And so I want to leave an open door for people to leave these movements. I really do.
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to say this isn't horrific, but really what bothers me the most are the apologists who come out of contemporary media who kind of, not even apologist is the wrong word. It's this idea that white nationalism has ever been, hasn't been a part of American society. It has been since the beginning.
Of course it has.
And the contemporary race beat in America's newsrooms really bothers me because it's like, let's do an anthropological study of non-white Americans and see how they're weird and unusual.
Yes, yeah.
But the race beat in America, in order to succeed, really also has to study whiteness as a construct.
Yes, it does.
The politics of whiteness, the ethnicity of whiteness, the remunerative aspects of how you can succeed by being white. Donald Trump would definitely not be president if he wasn't white. Can you imagine?
Oh, my dear.
A woman or a person of color
my dear.
holding office?
Are you kidding? Yeah. No, and in fact, I think one of the jobs of white feminists in particular, but the women's movement in general in this country, is to address those white suburban women and some white working class women who voted for Trump, the majority of whom voted for Trump. Whereas, interestingly enough, all women of color, in particular African-American women, did not. They knew,
exactly.
They recognized that. So first of all, one question is, who's the real feminist here? This is so interesting. Then in that case, but also, we had it, now that we've got more figures, we now know that we had those in three, I think, key districts, 2 in Michigan and 1 in Wisconsin. We had those white women after his Access Hollywood grab 'em remark. They came over, which is why the polls showed a surge for her after it. And then after the Comey letter dropped, they got scared and they skittered back home to the Republican Party. Those women are usually voting Republican. So we haven't dented that yet. But the resistance, the identification to whiteness while denying that it's there, is a real double mind screw up.
I like, that needs to be the pull quote from this. You're exactly right. It's the resistance plus pretending it doesn't exist.
It's gaslighting.
Yeah, it is. It's an insidious form of gaslighting, and I have a lot of friends who I became friends with quite early in high school and college, who came from working class white families and came to understand how they were being gamed by the political system. And often, many of my friends who grew up white working class have families that were predominantly Trump voters, and they were so kind of torn up about it. But again, and maybe this is me being too nice, I tried to say, well, it doesn't surprise me, because in this country, there's whole bodies of political science research and sociological research that say that the number one thing you don't want to be in a country like America is in last place. So if you're a working class white American, right, according to the way that we dole out power here, it's actually better to so-called work against your interest in order to not collaborate with working class people of color,
right,
as long as you can stay a little bit ahead of them. So I don't see it as actually working against your interests. It's like, what are your interests? Do you want to work on class-based solutions to education, jobs, et cetera, or do you just not want to be in last place in a country that treats people in last place terribly? And so we have to also understand that when we talk about these ideas of working against your self-interest, one of the most powerful constructions of self-interest in America has been around using both race and gender,
right,
in order to keep certain groups in last place. And as long as that's the dynamic, then you're not going to have collaboration in a meaningful way.
That's right. And that's something that worries me, even if, and I would like to say when, Trump goes down. When he goes down, what do they do with their identity, Farai? Because they have identified very strongly with him, and you and I both know that when he goes down, he's going to go down with a big, scandalous crash. And then we have to deal with Pence, and that's a whole other nightmare, not for this conversation. But at least the absolute craziness of him and the blatancy, the permission given for all of this to come out from under the rock, what are they left with? And if we don't address that and begin to think about it now, I think that we're in trouble, because their identity is very much bound up in that.
I agree, and I think that, again, it's about looking very analytically at what we call self-interest. I mean, the number one interest that a being has is self-preservation.
Right.
You know, that's almost a biological imperative. But if you look more broadly at it psychologically, people want to have a sense that they are living in a world where they're not powerless and they're not just pawns.
Yeah.
And so much of American society today essentially is about a construction of certain elites, and it's not just one type of elite. There's financial elites and celebrity elites and whatever. And if you're not part of that elite, then you're a pawn.
Right.
And a lot of people viewed the Trump candidacy as a chance for themselves, if not to be a primary actor, at least to be on the winning side. And once you take that away, you're right. People will be bereft. They will be angry.
Yeah.
And it's astounding. The idea of billionaire-led populism in and of itself is astounding. But when you understand that this is a country that really urges people to take a winner-take-all mentality,
right,
you can understand why people would buy into this. And yet, the lead anecdote in my piece, The Call-to-Whiteness, is about a white woman who's married to a man who's black and Mexican American, and talking to her daughter about the election, and also talking to me about people who were saying that the reason to vote for Donald Trump was not to dilute the white race. That is a straight up white supremacist appeal. And in many cities and towns, people are not that obvious. And she was in the Las Vegas area, so she's not living in the middle of nowhere, but in a lot of places still, people wouldn't say it that blatantly. But you have to realize there's also white Americans who are hearing this kind of stuff, and they're horrified, not just because they might have a multiracial child, but for any number of personal reasons. And that's also something that has to surface. Like, what if you are a white American and people around you are saying things like, well, don't dilute the white race, but you know that your boss believes that and your pastor believes that, et cetera.
Right.
What are you supposed to do? I mean, there's many things that you can do, but you have to realize that people will be cut off from the herd if they voice any kind of true assertions of racial equality or gender equality. So there's a lot of people who are grappling with the difference between their personal ethics and their public ethics.
Right.
And that's an opportunity too.
Maybe one way of showing the generic widespread existence of whiteness and the denial that it exists at the same time. What if we did a wicked reversal and we started to call for White History Month and Male History Month?
Actually, that's not a bad idea.
Anyway, this is a great piece, people. If you haven't read it, go to Farai what was it, org or com?
.com.
Go to Farai.com and read The Call to Whiteness, The Rise of the New White Nationalism and Inadequate Establishment Whiteness Response. It is wonderful. It is way overdue.
Robin, thank you so much for everything. I appreciate it.
Time for another short pause here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, and I'll be back in just a moment when we'll visit the Surrealism Corner.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
And we're back again, ready to visit the Surrealism Corner. I do wish the Trumpian crew would get on the same book, much less on the same page, regarding non-facts of anti-facts of unfacts. 200 years ago, during the campaign, Trump spokesperson Scotty Nell Hughes said famously, "There's no such thing anymore as fact." But then there was Kellyanne Conway's memorable coinage of the phrase, alternative facts. Now, the past week gave us the all but brown-shirted image of Trump's senior policy advisor, Stephen Miller, a precocious Joseph Goebbels at only age 32, holding forth about the supreme infallibility of Trump's actions being above the courts and repeating lies about voter fraud to boot, then barking, "It is the fact and you will not deny it. Achtung! Or we will stand you up against the wall and shoot you." He has also said, quote, "I will say and I will do things that no one else in their right mind would do," period, close quote. We should keep an eye on Miller, who has the fanatic demeanor of a rabid Rottweiler. Surrealism? Well, since we all saw the images of the dinner party, I won't dwell too long on Trump's having dined with the hapless Prime Minister of Japan on the public patio of Mar-a-Lago last weekend, while hearing on an unsecured cell phone the news that North Korea had conducted a missile test, and then debating what to do about this classified information at the table in the open with his aides and the Japanese PM. When cornered and asked about this, Senator John McCain could barely find the words, muttering, can't make it up. But it was a big hit on Facebook, where pictures taken by diners at nearby tables were posted with lots of excited comments like, "Holy moly, here at the center of the action." But you might not have heard this little jewel before. Before he took office, when Trump made a surprise call to the Air Force general managing the Pentagon's largest weapons program, the Lockheed Martin F-35 jet, listening in on one of those calls was Dennis Muhlenberg, CEO of Lockheed's chief rival, Boeing. Trump's the kind of guy who loves to set people against each other and make them fight for his favors. And in the uproar over Flynn and sanctions and hacking and Russia and Ukraine and leaks ad nauseum, Jason Chaffetz, chair of the House Oversight Committee, who conducted endless probes of the Obama administration, of Hillary Clinton, and of Benghazi, the same Jason Chaffetz, who was booed a week ago when he returned to his own district, well, Jason has decided he probably won't delve into the Russian problem, after all. Or the Kellyanne Conway ethics problem, the one about having hyped Ivanka's products on TV. About the latter, he at first had said, "Oh, wrong," but now he's decided that the problem has, quote, taken care of itself. Besides, Jason's too busy investigating the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention as to why, in an attempt to raise public awareness of the Zika virus, the CDC gave a grant to the Jim Henson Muppet Company to feature Cy the Science Kid in an educational cartoon about the virus. Now that's a real threat, people. And since we touched on Kellyanne, last week, I have to admit, I almost, for 11 seconds, felt sorry for her. But it passed. It's just that the woman looked really haggard and, ooh, cranky. Gone was Propaganda Barbie's dentine smile, and she stuttered and stammered while spewing the line that she's not concerned about thousands of people jamming phone lines at the White House and the Senate protesting Trump's policies and cabinet nominees. Nor was she concerned about his plummeting poll numbers, which were historically low to begin with. That's because Kellyanne says she only cares about her RPI, or her real person impact meter, because this administration cares about what matters to real people. Yeah, here I sit, an apparently imaginary person speaking these imaginary words to you, an imaginary listener, imaginaringly hearing them. Remember how Pinocchio always wanted to be a real boy? Odd to be accused of not being real by someone whose nose could now rival the length of the Dakota pipeline from lying. Then again, Kellyanne has reason to be grumpy. She's persona non grata on a number of television shows, including MSNBC's popular Morning Joe, and at least for now, all of CNN. The reason? Quote, she doesn't provide reliable information, close quote. That was a statement from CNN. The former Republican pollster has become quite fond of being in the spotlight and reportedly is trying to book herself on TV shows without as much success as she'd like, although there's always Fox News to scurry home to. Moreover, the White House sent her out to tell the world that Flynn had Trump's full support, then within an hour undercut her, and 2 hours later fired Flynn. As for Flynn, well, he's not the only one caught playing Russian roulette. According to the New York Times, at least 3 other men who worked for Trump's campaign had sustained contacts with Russian intelligence officials. Wall Street financier Carter Page, former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort, and Roger Stone, an opposition research political operative with an addiction to pornography, who has Nixon's face tattooed on his back and is happy to be known as the, quote, boastful black prince of Republican sleaze, period, close quote. The FBI is reportedly investigating all these guys. So here we are, with the FBI and at least 4 other American intelligence services believing that Russian intelligence agencies under Putin's direction worked to help get Trump elected and may well have done so with collusion from the Trump campaign. We don't know where these investigations will lead or how high, but Trump, speaking to reporters on Air Force One, claimed not to have seen any reports that Flynn brought up sanctions at all in his quid pro quo conversations with the Russian ambassador. But we do know that that was a lie, because, as mentioned earlier, Trump and his inner circle had been informed by the Justice Department about the phone calls and then sat on the information for days, huddling with lawyers and not giving one damn about danger to the nation, only worried about getting caught. When it became clear that the info was leaking and uncontainable, only then did they go public. And what makes them think the leaks don't come from one of them? Still with me? Well, in sum, Trump, who grinned during the campaign that he loved leaks and publicly invited Russia to hack the privileged emails of Hillary from when she had been Secretary of State, now calls leaks dangerous and criminal. The FBI and other intelligence agencies are on the hunt, and Trump now plans to have one of his billionaire businessman allies investigate the U.S. intelligence system. Meanwhile, Congress refuses to convene a proper independent counsel and impartial investigation, yet really does not want to investigate anything itself, but might be forced to in time by enough enraged public opinion. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. But let's wind up our visit to the Surrealism Corner on a delightful note. States are finding new ways to troll Trump, as reported by Natasha Korecki in Politico. A California lawmaker is demanding Melania's immigration records. New Hampshire lawmakers have introduced a resolution demanding a federal probe into Trump University. Illinois legislators are calling for an investigation into Russian interference in the election. And they have drafted a formal invitation to Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto, inviting him to their chambers to speak about the potential ill effect a border wall could have on Mexico-Illinois relations. blue state legislatures are not only in full frontal rebellion against Trump, they're actually trolling him. We're going to take one last break here at Women's Media Center Live. But I'm Robin Morgan still, and I will return directly in just a moment with those fighting words.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
And welcome back again to some fighting words. You would not believe how hard I try to keep this Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan program from becoming Trump Media Undead with Trump, 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 Trump. But the threat, the impact, the sheer insanity of this regime spread like green ooze in a horror movie. For instance, I want to return here to the subject of the press. And guess where that leads? Still, I want to try. So I'm going to skitter through a couple of short items before I get to some substance about press coverage and, surprise, the women's movement. But first, item. The Gateway Pundit, a provocative conservative blog fervently pro-Trump with a penchant for promoting false rumors about Hillary's health and voter fraud, well, they will now report on politics from the White House. Lucian Wintrich, who has collaborated previously with Milo Yiannopoulos, that's the guy who thinks Breitbart News and the Drudge Report are way too moderate. Well, Wintrich had been invited by Press Secretary Sean Spicer to attend White House briefings. Wintrich said he would be reporting far more fairly than the left-wing outlets currently occupying the briefing room, presumably referring to the nation's major newspapers and broadcasters. For the third press conference in a row, Spicer called only on right-wing outlet reporters and took only softball questions. The same with Trump when he appeared together with Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel, for a joint press conference. The Americans were all from right-wing outlets. Those were the only ones he called on, and they had only puff questions. It took an Israeli journalist to cut through the saccharine. Called on by Trump, who apparently assumed the question would be nice, as he puts it, the reporter asked a serious question about the rise of anti-Semitism in the United States due to Trump's influence. After recovering from shock, Trump responded by reciting his electoral college numbers, which he said, inaccurately, were historically high, and then he smiled that there would be a lot of love in his rebuilt America. That was it. Netanyahu had to leap into the breach and vouch that Trump was not anti-Semitic. Of course, the son-in-law was mentioned. No one, on the other hand, mentioned that Jews had been deliberately omitted from a mention, even, in the White House formal National Holocaust Remembrance Day statement. Item. Politico reporter Marianne Levine was the intrepid journalist behind the Oprah tape mentioned earlier, the tape of Andrew Puzder's former wife, the tape that brought his Labor Secretary nomination crashing down. Levine's discovery of the tape's existence and then her search for it makes for an absolutely wonderful story, covering more than 2 months, 2 coasts, and hours digging through at least 90 Oprah episodes buried in an archive for more than 25 years. It's a real spotlight and all the president's men kind of story, and you can check it out at Politico.com. Item. A Colorado newspaper is threatening to file a libel suit against a state lawmaker who accused the publication of printing fake news, setting the stage for a possible legal battle that could test the definition of the Trump phrase. when Colorado State Senator Ray Scott, a Republican, tweeted that the Daily Sentinel of Grand Junction had published a fake news story about a bill that would change the state's public records law, the paper's publisher, Jay Seaton, an attorney, wrote that, quote, Senator Scott has defamed this company and me as its leader. To borrow a phrase from another famous Twitter user, I'll see you in court. Seaton subsequently said he might take a couple of weeks to cool off before deciding whether to file suit, but he insisted to the Washington Post that he was not merely engaging in tough talk. It's highly unusual for a news outlet to be the plaintiff in a defamation case. More often, publications have to defend themselves against libel claims made by people who object to their coverage. During the campaign, Trump vowed to weaken libel protections for journalists. Quote, so when they write negative articles, we can sue them and win lots of money. Finally, in closing, why, oh why, does it seem to be a ritual that with numbing regularity, after a visible triumph of the women's movement, some editors feel compelled to assign stories trashing feminism? All through the 1970s and 80s, magazine covers of Newsweek, Time, The Atlantic, and other mainstream magazines displayed variations of the same sentiment. The death of feminism. Is feminism dead now? Some even showed a coffin with the women's symbol on it. Why, the women's movement will never be a success. Why, the women's movement is no longer a success. Why, older women will never join the women's movement. Then, as time went on and we young-uns aged, why, younger women will never join the women's movement. Why, the women's movement is at heart a uniquely American phenomenon. Why, the women's movement will never make it in the U.S. Why the women's movement is, and then here you have to fill in the blank, too white, black, old, young, lesbian, straight, or not sufficiently white, black, old, young, etc., etc. You get the point. So forth and so on, until it became a running joke among those of us who were long-distance runners and were, and are, still going. So why am I surprised that in the wake of the largest march in the history of this country, at least 3 major pieces have dropped within the past couple of weeks? The Case Against Contemporary Feminism by Gia Tolentino in The New Yorker, Since When Is Being a Woman a Liberal Cause by Susan Shira in the New York Times Sunday Review, and Forces in Opposition by Amanda Hess in the Times Sunday Magazine. Oh, good grief. Separately and collectively, the pieces all ask, can movement factions hold it together? They critique the Women's March, and by extension the feminist movement, as being too insular and too broad, too inclusive and thus diluted, not inclusive enough and thus irrelevant, too white and too multicultural, too practical and too idealistic, too leftist and too capitalist, too mainstream and too radical, and so forth and so on, blah, 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 blah. Apparently it has not yet occurred to their editors to stop assigning the same story after 50 or more years of the contemporary wave of feminism in the United States. And oh, I do understand and do not blame young journalists having a hard time saying no to a juicy assignment, even if they privately think it's dumb. But give me a break. Give yourselves a break. Give us all a break. The women's movement is global and alive, vibrant with both factionalism and solidarity, pragmatic and idealistic, and each day more representative of the majority of women in the United States and, in fact, on the planet. It's not card-carrying. Critique us all you like. We're not afraid of criticism, and God knows we're used to it. But do spare us the idiocy of having to tolerate what pretends to be a fresh piece on feminism, which has the publication, the editor, and the writer stumbling on platitudes with an air of enormous discovery. It's round. It rolls. I wonder what it is. The 5 million women, and men and babies and children, who gathered in the women's marches, that's plural, all across the United States, not to speak of the rest of the world, did so with militance, affirmation, peaceful protest, righteous rage, even with joy. What's more important, the marches were devised and organized and led by women, and for the first time ever, men didn't try to wring leadership away or co-opt the events. They actually joined. What's most important, people didn't run home and forget about it afterwards, as all the naysayers predicted. They've mobilized and organized, and they're making and sustaining glorious trouble. So get with the program, sister and brother journalists. The women's movement, which may have been your mother's movement and is now your movement and will keep on being a powerful movement as long as it's needed, that women's movement, that feminism, ain't going nowhere. We're here to stay. Put that in your pipe and write it. Those are my fighting words. Add yours on Twitter and be sure to tag us at WMC Live and use the hashtag Fighting Words. And that's it for today. This program is syndicated, but if you can't find the broadcast on a radio station in your area, you can always visit us at WMCLive.com for the show plus the archive of all our previous episodes, and at iTunes Worldwide, where you can stream, download, and subscribe to our show's podcast. Also, be sure to find WMC Live on Facebook and Twitter. And you can check out my own website and blog at robinmorgan.net and find me on Facebook and Twitter, too. Portions of this program were taped earlier. Opinions expressed here do not necessarily represent the WMC. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. WMC President and Executive Producer of this program, Julie Burton, and our founding and sustaining sponsor, Regina K. Scully. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us, and don't forget to join us next week right here on Women's Media Center Live.
For the smartest talk about news, politics, sex, books, religion, race, and more, tune your radio to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan. Audacious, witty, provocative, informative, and fun. It's Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on WMCLive.com. Talk radio with a brain.